Hey, my name's Adam. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be covering building an LS swapped RX-8 in 10 steps. This of course first assumes that you've already got an RX-8 to swap. Now the car I swapped was a 2005 RX-8. I actually found this in Portland for $800. I won't go into gross details, but basically I found it there and I drove it 1800 miles back to KC, and that's with low compression. When it comes to the swap itself, there are a number of kits out there. I decided to go with a V8 Roadster's RX-8 LS swap kit. I'd had some experience with V8 Roadsters in the past. Basically all the kits are fairly similar, but they just all give you a head start. You can either fabricate it yourself, that is definitely an option, so it's entirely up to you what you do. For the build, I used a 6.2 litre LS3, a Tremec T56 from a Camaro, and a Ford 8.8 differential from a Ford Cobra. For the V8 Roadsters kit, you also need a steering rack from an ND Miata, but more on that in a minute. The first step involves removing everything you don't need from the RX-8. This includes the front subframe, the engine, the transmission, and most of the electronics in the engine bay. In fact, the only thing you need to retain, at least for this kit, for the V8 Roadsters kit, is the fuse box. Anything else that plugs in can just be removed. I actually also went ahead and removed the ABS and DSC block. The rear end on the RX-8 is actually pretty stout. Some people choose to retain it. After my Miata experience, I decided to swap it out just so I didn't run into issues later. This is the only part of the V8 Roadsters kit that actually requires any welding, so it's a lot easier to do with that subframe out of the car. Now in order to do this you have to remove the suspension. It's recommended to upgrade this anyway, so it's worth doing. I didn't have a spring compressor handy, so whatever you do, please don't try this at home, but here you can basically see me using zip ties to actually remove that coilover. I ended up moving this to another RX-8 that I had at the time. Again, please don't try this at home. The differential options for the V8 Roadsters kit are basically Ford 8.8 differentials from a rear independent vehicle. So basically the Ford Cobra or the Thunderbird, not the 07 Explorer. It's got to have those flat ear mounts at the front. Just like the Miata, I decided to upgrade the internals to the Ford Performance T2 Torsen. In fact, if anyone has a need for the original 03 Cobra internals, let me know. As soon as they're gone, I'll edit the description below. The V8 Roadsters kit includes a front and rear bracket for the differential. The rear bracket sits sandwiched between the rear diff cover and the differential itself. For this you'll need an upgraded GT500 rear cover, which I ended up getting from American Muscle. Now the ears on the rear bracket, they were actually a little bit too wide to fit in the mount with the bushings on, so I had to trim down some metal. You can see here just how much material I had to remove. It's really important to note with that GT500 rear cover that that top hole is actually not the fill hole like it would be traditionally on other Ford 8.8 differentials. You'll see what happens if you watch my first video if you end up filling it to that hole. You'll also need to vent the top part of this cover. To fit the rear bracket, longer bolts are required. Here's the original bolt length as well as the thickness of the plate. Ace Hardware or similar had pretty much every bolt I required, so get used to heading down to your local hardware store. Whilst you're there, you'll also need to pick up bolts for the front of the differential. I don't know why, but the kit doesn't come with them. I really wish it did. With the rear brace fitted and the front brace bolted to the differential, you now have to weld that front brace to the subframe. After welding, make sure you shoot all that bare metal with some undercoat or paint. This is a pretty stout conversion, so hopefully it won't give you any issues. With the welding complete, the subframe can be bolted back to the car. So this isn't the first time I've used a V8 Roadster's subframe, and for whatever reason, they don't always line up. For this particular one, I had to ream out one of the holes which goes on the stud from the actual chassis itself. I also had to spread the subframe using a bottle jack and 2x4s to get it to align. Once it's fitted at the front, I actually had to use ratchet straps to align the rear holes. I had the same experience with the Miata, so it wasn't actually a real surprise. And yes, before you say it, the car is straight. With the test fit of the front subframe completed, the steering rack can be mounted. Now V8 Roadsters use an ND rack, which is actually a hydraulic rack, so it gives you much better feel. They modify the lines to clear the sump from the LS engine. The tie rods are actually reused from the RX-8 steering rack, so make sure you keep those. Now there are a plethora of LS engines out there, anything from a $500 Breakers Yard Special to an $8,000 GM Performance, all the way through to a multi-tens of $1,000 blueprinted engine. The choice is really yours on what you use. This engine actually came from the race car, the Miata. I ran it for the first year, but ended up with a ton of cooling issues, hence the LS2 dry sump that's in there now. To date, I've built a few LS engines. I think this is number 5. This one was built from the bare block up, and the overheating issues were solved by fitting the correct oil pump. Long story short, but in the previous build, the theory is that I actually used the incorrect pump because I used a high volume, high pressure pump. The theory from Melling is that the oil pressures we were seeing being so high meant the pump was constantly in bypass. The engine itself had pretty much stock bearing clearances, and so that extra volume just meant the pressure was building and ended up going into bypass constantly. In that bypass state then, it's just superheating the oil, hence the overheating. Due to the engine's racing heritage, I already had an improved racing crank scraper, windage tray and sump baffles. That with the new oil pump, there should be no oiling issues with this engine. You could say I have a bit of an obsession with LS motors. Part of it is because how easy they are to build. This is largely down to the fact that this book exists. Now there are a ton of options out there, but I really like this book because it covers everything from tearing down the original motor, what you need to look for at the machine shop, to then rebuilding, going all the way back to a long block and beyond. Thoroughly recommend you checking it out if you haven't already. I'll include a link below. For this build, I ended up using a pair of new GM LS3 heads. If you've ever wondered how heads are shipped, here it is. I will be for sure keeping these boxes handy. And here is the completed LS short block. A great example of illustrating why these are so popular to put into so many conversions. It's so compact for the displacement. The accessory kit itself is actually from a CTSV. The only difference in this is that I used a Katech tensioner. I much prefer that one. The gearbox here is from a Camaro, and as a result, the shifter doesn't line up with the transmission hole. In order to get it to line up, you need one from a GTO. You can either source an OEM part, but I opted to go for this Sicky short shifter. Another thing to watch out for is the intake and oil pan. The intake itself is from a Camaro or Corvette style, which is much lower profile, but you have to be careful of the port shapes for the intake. The early generation had cathedral ports, whereas this later generation motor actually had these square ports. The oil pan itself comes from an F-body Camaro. That's particular to this kit, so it may vary what you need for your particular kit or for how you end up mounting the engine. Whilst I was rebuilding the engine, I had the injectors cleaned by Jesse Prather Motorsport. This is well worth doing. Just take a look at the variance in these numbers. This is not something your computer can actually take care of on an independent cylinder basis. So that would end up with fueling issues all over the place. Finally, I've learnt my lesson and I now hook up the PCV system. I've blown rear main seals with this by messing with it. I actually understand it can also help with blow-by, so all good in my mind. So basically you get the fresh air where that's taking the air into the engine, and then this one where basically it's effectively sucking, or at least any of the pressure can be relieved from here, from the valley cover into the intake itself. So over here that's actually blocked off. You actually don't need this part of the engine bay, so it can be removed using your favourite chassis cutting tool. Angle grinder, plasma torch. You can actually go ahead and remove the battery tray as well, because that's going to be relocated to the boot. The only other modification required to the engine bay is massaging the lip on the frame rails and shaping the corners where that meets the firewall. Make sure when you do this you have the headers mounted to the engine so you can see exactly what needs doing. This part is a little bit of trial and error. One thing to note with this kit is to actually get the engine mounts the correct way round. They're actually side to side interchangeable, and if you put them on the wrong way, the engine sits way too far back. So this is the right side of the car. There's the lower wishbone on the right side, and then this is the right engine mount. So as you can see, the orientation there, where it basically is moving the engine further forward. So you can see there's basically another bolt, or at least the other bolt that bolts to the engine is further right of the actual engine mount itself. So just look at it from this side. You can basically see there how it sticks forward, and then going to the other side, you see a very similar story where there's the back of the engine mount, so that's towards the back of the engine. But there is the other bolt that goes onto, you can see there, goes onto the engine itself, is sticking in front of the engine mount. So that's the trick. So this is the side with the steering rack, and you want that bolt basically sticking in front of the engine mount. That moves the whole engine forward. With everything in place, you can work out where that trans brace needs to be mounted to the chassis. Okay, so working back, this brace is almost identical to how it's mounted on the Miata. So basically there's a part that goes around the frame rail itself, and you get these holes that you can either bolt through, or you can see here that these have just been welded. You see the welds. So this then has a plate on it, and the actual trans brace sits on top of that, and it's got the hoops in for the exhaust. So both sides then, similar story here, ignore my shield for a second. You've got the part that goes around the frame rail that you can either bolt through or weld. And then again, the hoop for the exhaust. And there's basically a bushing, so I'll look at it from the other angle. There's basically a bushing that sits on the trans brace that bolts to the transmission itself. And that's basically it. Transmission is mounted. With everything happily installed, you can now mount the steering shaft and connect the power steering pump. This is probably a little bit trickier to see, but basically with the steering shaft itself, it was really tight on clearance on this header. So that is something to watch out for. So I had to play around with the length and how it attached, but it was pretty close. I ended up rounding just that part of the header itself, but you can see there it's fairly close. Coming down then to the steering rack itself, you can see you've got two lines. One of the lines actually on the top, that black one just there, that runs to the pressure side. Sorry for the light above. That runs basically to the pressure side on the pump. The other line then, this is actually the return. So this return I've actually got going through under here to a cooler. Again, it's probably recommended. I don't know if everybody does this, but when I had that seal break, I wasn't going to take any risks. So there's basically a cooler there, and I just got creative with the lines because I didn't want to have to add additional lines. There's just a connector there. So that basically comes out of the steering rack, goes in through the cooler. That's just a join, so ignore that. Imagine these two were just joined. And then from there, it runs back up to the top. You probably can't see it, but that line, that black line here, runs all the way to the top, and that goes into the return on the pump itself. But just make sure you connect it the correct way round. If you don't, you're going to blow this seal, and it's almost impossible to find. I ended up having to buy another rack just to get this seal. So again, if anybody needs another ND rack to modify and maybe you can work out where the seal comes from, happy to let you have it. So just give you a close-up of this. So this is the seal that needs replacing in the steering rack itself, and that just sits down where the steering column connects to the rack. And this is basically the plug with another seal that goes on top. You can see the damage that reversing the polarity on the steering rack caused, and so in order to get this plug out, a special tool is required, and I couldn't find that anywhere. So what I ended up doing was taking basically, let me measure this in a second, but basically I took this nut, and you can see there I started shaping it internally until it would fit around that. And then once it's fit around that, I could take the appropriate socket, put it over, and it was a deep socket because you've obviously got the steering rack part coming out there, and then that just allowed me to undo that. So what I basically did was undid this one from the replacement rack I got, took the seal out because that was the only thing that was wrong, transferred that across, and then did everything back up. And then I found the socket, so it's a 36mm, that's how big it is. So basically find yourself a 36mm nut. I can't remember what the Imperial or the SAE equivalent is, but basically find that, shape that, and then you can use that to undo it. With the differential, transmission and engine done, you can now connect the axles and driveshaft. That should be pretty much it for the driveline. So I haven't got any pictures of this, but basically here's the driveshaft, so you can see the yoke there that goes into the transmission itself, or the U-joint I suppose. And then so from here, it's a single piece aluminium driveshaft, and then the appropriate adapter, probably not going to get a better angle on that, appropriate adapter that goes basically from the driveshaft to the differential. And then these bolts are easy enough to source from Ford, and you're meant to replace those each time. And here are the driveshafts themselves. They run down, and you can actually get an ABS ring, so I got that option just in case I ever wanted to make ABS work. And again, similarly the other side, no different. So as you might expect, ran out of time on this video. I'm just really conscious of how long editing actually takes, and rather than waiting any longer because it was taking so long to edit the whole video, I really wanted to get something out for you guys. So I've done the first 5 steps, and then very shortly hereafter the next 5 steps will be coming. But don't fret, I've done a little drive along video at the end of this one just so you can kind of experience the car. So there were a couple of requests for that. Alright, so we're going to have to see how this comes out. People are asking for a ride along video, or at least a drive video. So we'll give it a go. Hold start. Love having all the data. Yes! Alright, so we're in 4th gear. 38 miles an hour, just under 2,000 RPM. You put your foot down and it still accelerates. That's a beautiful thing about a V8, just all that torque, especially the LS. So we're about to go on the highway. That noise. Oh, it's wet. Third gear, I'll try and wait until I get a gap. That's only 4,500 RPM. So just about to open up. So 3rd gear, 25 miles an hour. And there was a car. So that's the absolute beauty about a platform like this. So this is cruising along at 65, just over 1,500 RPM. The drone isn't too bad from the exhaust. You know you could drop it down a couple of gears, so this is in sync. And just pull away. definitely damp now, it's raining quite a bit heavier. We'll see how it handles. Problem is it catches up with the car in front too quickly. Have to be good. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, feel free to subscribe, like and share with your friends. I look forward to the exciting journey ahead. Thanks guys, and have a great day.